Hey, welcome to another episode. In this video we'll be painting a landscape environment, and as usual we'll be starting with a very simple sketch and end up with a final painting. Also stay tuned, because by the end of the video we'll break down the composition and some of the decisions that I made along the way. My name is Victor, I'm a concept artist and illustrator working for film and games. I really hope you guys will enjoy this video and find it helpful. So let's start. Alright, so we're starting with a very simple Linework sketch, and I'm not trying to spend too much time on it, very rough. Just as soon as I see that my composition works out and I sort of get this clarity I'm looking for, I can already move on and try to establish the mood, see some color combinations and overall the value metrics. Already at this stage you can continue with blocking in some very simple flat color, right? And since there is not a lot of structure and it's not very complex or intricate, you will see that at this stage things are moving on quite fast, and it is indeed so, because it's just a bunch of trees, the values are very grouped, so there's not a lot of structure and a lot of perspective and stuff you have to plan. That's why already at this stage you can kind of get a feel of where you want to go with your composition, with your mood. So advice I would give you guys is don't forget about your reference images, right? Try to look for stuff that interests you, maybe some ideas, like for example the slanted, the sort of like the broken trees in the middle ground, I've kind of got only from one reference, and basically just from that reference images I've kind of developed this whole composition. So nothing is similar to what you see there in the reference image, like the color temperature is different, the composition is different, the values are different, but just this idea already sparkled sort of like this composition that you see in front of you. Now I'm spending a bit more time blocking in the rest of the elements and already thinking how I can emphasize my focal point, right? The area where the horse and the rider is, staying with, and the highlighted ground. By the way guys, don't forget there is a free brush pack in the description with some of my most used brushes, and for those of you that want to learn even more, there's my Patreon page where I upload full PSD files with all the layers, more brush packs, and the complete video tutorials with even more commentary. Make sure to check it out. Moving on to other elements that are sort of, adjacent to the focal point. In this case, those tree trunks. I'm sort of pushing and pulling the values. You can see now that I'm working on the water a little bit. Don't forget to add some color variation. Don't let things be like, stale, just one, color hue. Try to work in the, in the similar range, but add some color variation here and there, just to add a little bit more interest to your work. Right now I'm still pushing and pulling the values, and you can see that continuously I will try and sort of like assess if my value matrix is working well, if my composition is being clear even in black and white, even in a small thumbnail sort of like size. I'm zooming in, quite a lot in the video, but actually I'm working at quite a small size, maybe like half the screen, half the real estate I have on my screen. And right now, after I spent a little bit of time on the focal area, on our middle ground on the left, you can already, move on just to other areas, and don't leave them unattended, because you might create an inconsistent feel to your image if you're like sort of focusing on each area one by one. And but again, you also have to think about contrast, and if you're adding unnecessary contrast in areas that do not require it. For example, I'm spending some time on the background and then I'm coming back to the middle ground, and I'm sort of doing it gradually, adding layers of details, of information, and trying to assess each time if whatever I'm doing is actually benefiting my focal point, my composition in general, or it's just gonna detract the viewer's eye from the focal point. So you kind of have to think and balance these things out. I'm thinking that I should probably increase the contrast in the middle ground where our characters are, just to make it pop a bit more. So you can see that I'm darkening, and I keep darkening the foliage there behind them, just to make them pop a bit more, and also to increase the contrast between the ground as well, because I really want it to pop, and I really wanted to like sort of accentuate this area with light in this case, you know, like with the value contrast. And I'm gonna spend some time on those fallen trees, though maybe some older trunks and stuff like that, and I'm just gonna work a bit on the foliage, because even if you don't want them to create additional, you know, contrast or distract you from the focal point, you want to make sure that you have a consistent level of detail. So it can gradually fall off, for example, from the background, because it doesn't make sense to place lots of concentrated details in a background further away, you know, with atmospheric perspective and all that. You kind of want to increase the value range right here in the middle where your focal point is, but also make sure that there is enough details everywhere so that there is a sort of a consistency to your whole painting. And as you can see, I'm spending a little bit of time on the character. Since it's smaller scale, I don't really worry about it too much. I just want it to be readable, sort of like for the viewer to understand right away from the first street, there is a horse, there is a character, everything is readable and understandable. And now I was thinking that definitely the horse should have some color accents. In the end I decided to add like these brighter spots, and you can see that I'm zooming out constantly, and that's because I'm checking if it's readable, if it makes sense, if the decisions I'm making are benefiting the whole composition. Alright, now very quickly I'm gonna show you guys how you can create water reflections. I'm just unifying the whole image, and I'm just duplicating the part that I want to be reflected, flipping it obviously, and then adding a motion blur filter, just like water does to the reflections. And then I'm using a mask to cover it all up, uncover just the areas I want to be seen in the reflection. So this is the simplest way I think you can do those reflections. Just make sure you're not overdoing it, right? You're not creating a exact reflection of what you see over there. The easiest way to sort of like make sure you're on the right path is just to look at the references, find any simple references you see of objects reflected in the water, and you can do that, you know, all day long. I'm also trying to add some color variation. I'm still continuing with this because it's really, it's something I've sort of strived to in every painting, to make it slightly look, at least a little bit, to look like it's some traditional oil painting. So that's why I'm adding this, you know, additional vibrance. I'm mixing sometimes colder hues and, you know, warmer hues all together, or just saturated and saturated ones. I'm keeping the value in mind, right? The value is still the same, but there's just some color variation, and I really like how it looks. So overall, right now, I'm just looking across the whole image, and I'm trying to see if everything works out, if there are some areas. Of course, you can spend even more time on it, since this sketch took roughly 2 hours, maybe 2 hours and 10-15 minutes, depending on how much time you want to spend, or what's your goal for the image, right? If it's for production, or if it's just some exploration, or, you know, like blue sky exploration and things like that. But in my case, I've decided to stop around this time, right? There's enough details, there's no need for too much information, too much additional information, because basically my statement is already done. And right now I'm just looking around, trying to figure out what kind of information I want to keep, or maybe add something new, remove, or work on the edges. and that would be pretty much it. Now let's have a look at, let's talk a little bit about the composition and about the final result. Alright, so just a few things about the composition, especially the first stages. You have to be quite careful how you compose the image, right? What details you're thinking to add, where you're planning your focal point to be. So in this case, clearly the focal point is this area, right? Because first of all, we have quite a bit of value contrast, as you can see, between these values, for example, right? There is quite a lot of it right here. I've also added this bright spot on the horse, maybe this one too. Keep a bit more interest, keep a bit more contrast in this area for the viewer's eye to spend a bit more time. A few other principles I use, for example, you can see that there are like some evident leading lines. For example, this one right here also kind of creates a directional push towards our focal point. Another thing worth mentioning is the level of detail in general. Quite a bit of, a bit more noise and details, contrast between the edges in this area, and then opposed, let's say, this area, right? Here we don't have a lot of contrast between the edges. Everything is a little bit softer, the transitions are softer, there's not a lot of information and contrast, and this is all done purposely, so it all supports our main idea, right? This point where we have our, our character looking around, deciding whether he should, cross this, can he cross it or not, and so on. And yeah, and other things you might have noticed, for example, I've removed, there was a log here, was creating quite a lot of contrast, was something like this, I believe. So I removed it because it was drawing too much attention. And the same thing I did with this element right here. I smoothed the edges a little bit, and I think I even changed the values a bit more, so it's not drawing too much attention in this area. All right, so I think that would be it in terms of talking about the composition and some decisions I've made throughout the whole process. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing and liking. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to ask any questions you have about the process or any suggestions you have. I'm trying to answer as many as I can. Thank you guys so much for watching till the end, and I hope to see you in the next video coming soon.